Definitely. Let's get back to Kundalini. I mean,
Okay. All right.
that's our main topic today. So, were there phases in your life where you just felt overwhelmed by all these impressions, when you can see through people, when you can read their minds, when you can see their auras, everybody at the same time, probably feel their thoughts, being in a party and having the thoughts of everybody else jump into your brain? How do you, I mean, how long did it take you to change these chaotic impressions into something useful?
Okay, so that brings us to a key factor involving the nature of reality. It took me 3 years. And what I learned was I had to be absolutely and utterly silent, because all of this noise, all of this seeing and knowing was my own curiosity. I was a nosy little thing. I wanted to know everything. And I was out there gobbling. Well, when Kundalini happens, you continue right on gobbling, and now you have this ton of input coming in. And it was chaotic. It really was. So I learned to turn it on and turn it off. So, and the silence, when you enter into the silence, it was like, oh, wow. Oh, yeah. This is where it's at. Absolute peace. And what bubbles up in that is joy. And so that the joy is kind of like a little tiny taste of the bliss that you're made of. That mind space is blissful. I talked about that at the beginning. That bliss is your core.
Could you direct when you got into the silence? Was it your intention at that time, or did it happen to you?
No, I intended it. I still do.
So you shut off, basically, you try to shut off all your impressions, all your senses, and just...
No, I shut off my curiosity.
Okay.
You have to stop reaching out for stuff. You know, you have to stop wanting to know. And what happens when you just want to know willy-nilly everywhere is that you get this ton of stuff coming in. So what you learn to do is direct what is it you want to know. And it becomes one of your talents, one of your skills, or a tool. It's really a tool. Consciousness is an amazing tool.
Yeah, and you have to learn how to control it. So I'm still wondering about the timeline. For the first 3 years, you were more or less confused.
Pretty much.
Hiding, and then you started with little jobs, keeping yourself above water.
Right.
How did it continue? I mean, it seems like it takes 10, 15 years until you really get to reap the fruit of what happened to you.
It did. It took me 17 years. So
tell us a little bit about what happened in between and all the struggles before we go to the gifts of what happens afterward once you get struggles.
Okay, so what happens is, if you're paying attention, you have this chaos and it's coming at you 24/7 and it never shuts off. But then there's these little things that you would notice that, oh, I saw that, and then it happened. Mm-hmm. How did that, you know, wow. So then you start noticing these little things, and I started putting together, I had to put together some new understanding of how reality really worked, because I was coping with it every single day. And so there was, you know, there was a period of time where I had to play with the lights around bodies. I discovered two things. One, if I touched somebody, their lights, you know, just expanded like poof. The second thing was that if I looked at them and I used my eyes, because there's 2 blue rays that come out of your eyes, if I looked at them and I, you know, messed around with my eyes in their energy field, they would turn around and look at me like, who's looking at me? They would know that they were being examined. And so I went to a Japanese woman that I knew who was teaching massage, and I said, teach me how to do massage. She had this wonderful way of doing massage. And she taught me. I had a series of lessons. There was no certification or anything. It was just, I wanted to learn, because I thought if I could get my hands on people in a legitimate way, I could maybe learn some things about how these lights work. And I did. I learned a lot. So there was a couple years where I worked as a massage therapist, and the relationship that I had wanted so badly fell apart, and I ended up living in somebody's basement with no money and nothing for about a year. And then I had a dream that somebody was coming into my life, and sure enough, he did. And so we ended up meeting, and it was not a memorable moment, but over time we got to know each other, ended up getting married, stayed together for 26 years. In that time, I was still learning. I was still trying things left and right. What happens when you do this? I discovered that I could go out and hear anywhere in space and time, so I could check on my mother and how she was doing. I could find out how a friend was doing, and I was making notes of all of this. And Jim and I were building. We built this huge building. He was a contractor, and he wanted to build me a little office, and so I have an 18,000 square foot house with an office in it, and it's now a large B&B. But I was busy. I also was seeing the future, and was knowing that it was really important to be self-sufficient, to collect things that would allow me to continue to operate self-sufficiently, regardless of whether we had electricity or not. And so I had cows, I had chickens, I still do. Had a huge garden. We were building this place. It took us 25 years to build this place. And when it was done, the relationship was done. He was like, well, I'm moving on. I still love you, but I don't want to be married.
His job was done. He built you the house, but
right. That's right. And about the place, Lily Hill Farm, there was a point where I realized, actually I was told by one of my teachers on the other side, when you build a physical structure and you're holding an intent or a vision and a set of emotions and awarenesses throughout that process, that physical structure then picks up all of that, the emotion, the thinking, the psychic awareness, the attitude, the intention. All of that is embedded in the lumber, the nails, the cement, the shingles, the window, everything, and continues to radiate that out into the world.
Even if somebody else builds it, like just people from the street doing the concrete, or
Yep.
A completely strange lumberjack puts the woods together, it still holds your energy because it's your house and you had the intention of what is to be done.
It holds your energy and theirs.
So if they're unhappy people and you don't pay them well.
That's right. Exactly. So, that's something that I think we have not embraced as a culture, that all of the physical things have the energy of whoever made them embedded in them.
Well, I can feel that with McDonald's.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, you just know that the people who had to cook that stuff were not very happy people.
Yeah.
And the food just doesn't feel good. And if you go to a restaurant where the chef is just enjoying what he's doing, you can taste that, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. So, so back to the whole, what was happening between, in those 17 years, at the 17-year point, I
So basically
suddenly,
you changed into a farm wife, or you built the farm and you started gardening and you started growing stuff on
right,
a larger scale or on a smaller scale, or enough to sell it.
enough, enough to be able to sell and to share with people. I was renewing and practicing all of the skills. How do you milk a cow?
Okay.
What kind of, how do you heal a chicken? You know, what kinds of little things you need to know. And I grew up in the garden. We were poor. We had a humongous garden. That was how we fed ourselves when I was a girl. And we canned, we froze, we dried things, we built our own house. I already knew how to build houses long before Jim and I got together. I was an engineer who was interested in building, construction, and architecture. So all of that just got put to use. So there was a point about 17 years after the Kundalini started where I was moaning one day about how difficult my life was, and I had to deal with all this knowing, and I had had so many lessons about how not to use those skills, and I was wanting to just go back to being an ordinary woman. And I heard this voice say, you are an ordinary woman. You are, what you're experiencing is what should be ordinary for the human race. You are no longer trapped in the consciousness of an underdeveloped human. And so that was kind of like, oh, this is the way it's supposed to be. And I stopped fighting it at that point, and then I really got interested in research. And I had written my first book, The Evolving Human, about the whole process and what I went through. So it's all out there for anybody, you know, who really is interested. And I'm sorry to say it's not in German.
What a pity. That's a real pity to not have it translated, because those
Yeah,
are things which need to get out into every part of the world, because more
yeah.
and more people, I have a feeling, are waking up. But I just want to hook into one thing you said, how not to use those skills. I mean,
Oh,
that's usually not just something somebody tells you how not to use them, but usually it's experience. You learn by trial and error, don't you?
right, right,
I mean, I'm trying to help people who have this experience on how not to misuse their newfound skills
right.
and how to use them. So any advice you can have in that direction?
Yeah, it's not about showing off. It's not about bragging what you can do. It's not about trying to change things that are in process. It's not about seeing this one moment and thinking, oh, that's it. There's 5 million other moments, and the energy could move in another direction at any moment because the reality is so dynamic. So you watch and you watch and you listen and you shut your mouth and you wait. And when you see that, yep, that's where it's going, you have been prepared. So it's, you know, it's a way of seeing, like my father, like one morning I was washing my face and I was splashing water on my face, and all of a sudden I heard this voice say, your father is going to call you and tell you he has cancer. And I was like, oh. And I turned off the water and I turned around and I said to Jim, my dad is going to get cancer. And he's, now, you don't know that. And I said, yes, I do. And he's, well, you know, just watch. So I didn't say anything. And sure enough, you know, sometime later, I forget how much later it was, I get this frantic call from my mother and dad, and he has just been diagnosed with colon cancer. And, you know, and he had 5 more years after that. But I had the preparation of knowing, oh, wow, what if this is coming at me? And then I also knew when he was going to leave here. And so I decided in his last year, this is his last year, I'm just going to enjoy every moment of this relationship with him. Every month I sent him either a letter or a postcard or a little gift. One time it was a cup. Another time it was a bunch of balloons with hydrogen or something in them. Another time it was a little tiny bouquet of flowers that just said, I love you. Or I went to visit him, you know, in that last year. And then I wrote a letter, a farewell letter, and just let him know that I so appreciated every single thing he had given up for me, and that I recognized him. And so I can't talk about it too much or I'll cry, but he left, and he's back now. And so those are the gifts, and those are the things that you do. Another situation that didn't turn out so well is that I ended up seeing something that I tried to abort. I saw something happening with my daughter in one school. You know, I moved her. She ended up moving to another school because I said yes, and the attack happened in that school. And so it was this, like, oh wow, I should have left it alone. You know, she got moved, and that's where the attack happened. So it's like, you don't jump just because you think you know. That is so important. And you don't use your skills to tell people what they want to hear. So that a lot of lessons around that. People will argue to try to force you to tell them what they want to hear, and you can't, you know.
Because it's a lie, basically. I mean, and lying,
Right.
if you know better, that's not okay.
You can't feed their illusions.
Yeah.
You can't feed their desire for control. You can't feed their fears. So, you know, you end up developing a style that allows you to deal with all that kind of stuff, that basically is very gentle and very healing, and that leads people to their own truth.
So is there the danger of overconfidence at a certain time?
Yes.
Until you really get your head knocked down.
Yes.
A lot of time
Yes.
you become humiliated.
You have to be humble. You have to be. Otherwise, you're going to end up with egg on your face and looking like a fool, suffering from foot in mouth disease. So, you know, there's big lessons. Eventually you realize you don't own that power. It owns you. You're a servant, and you have to use it wisely and well. So,
how was discernment of when to use it, when not to use it, is that just experience, or are there any guidelines for someone who goes through this?
The guidelines for me ended up being, if they don't ask, I'm not saying anything.
Okay.
And if they ask, I ask them, do you want me to tell you a story, or do you want the truth? And so
that's perfect.
Yeah. And if they say, I want the truth, I'll say, okay, are you sure? What if it hurts? Because I'm preparing them for what I'm seeing that may be a huge disappointment or something frightening. So, you know, and sometimes I'll turn it around and say, what is your gut telling you? Because I know they know. So, yeah, you learn a lot. You learn how to nurture people is what you learn. So.
But you're blessed with that gift of unconditional love.
Yeah.
When you awaken. So it shouldn't be too difficult to learn to nurture.
Right.
Or is that unconditional love also, can it be misused in a way that you lavish people with stuff they shouldn't be gratified about? I mean, if you give too much to children, just, you know, if you fulfill every wish of a child, some people think it's love, but actually it's not.
Well, when you said is however you said that, if it's unconditional love, you know, is it, and you paused, and my immediate reaction was sometimes it's boom, boom, and you just punch somebody right in the nose with the truth, because true love is an honest response.
Yeah, yeah,
Period. You can't be, you know, trying to, if you don't give somebody honest feedback about what they're saying or what they're doing or how they're behaving, how are they going to learn and grow? So it's tough love sometimes. And children are so easy. Children, they, and even adults, you know, I've been teaching now for 40 years. And what I've learned is that every single individual is reaching for something that will help them understand. They're reaching for more of themselves. They're reaching for their highest ethics, their highest values. They want that. I used to think, I'm really a good teacher, aren't I? And then I realized, no, that's built into them. They want that. I'm just opening the space for them to be able to move into that, which they do, and giving them permission to stay there.
So how
So
many years after your awakening would you now consider yourself to have become a good counselor versus a head-on, spontaneous, sometimes, whatever?
I would say probably the first, you know, people started asking to talk to me right from the beginning, and I'm like, for why? What for? No, I don't have time. Well, I'll pay you. For what? Just talk to me. You know, do that thing you do with, you know, where you see. And so I, you know, I stumbled around a lot. Um, but I'm going to say probably the last 25 years, I've been pretty smooth, pretty accomplished. My son said to me when, you know, he went away when he was probably 18 or so. He comes back when he's 29, and he's listening to me work with somebody or talk with somebody. And I get off the phone. He says, "Wow, Mom, you're really well greased." And I just was like, "Well greased. Okay, I haven't heard that before." He said, "How come you didn't get upset?" And I'm like, "Why should I get upset? You know,
Okay.
they they're the ones that are, when people get angry, they're not angry with me. They're just angry with themselves. Anger is change energy that hasn't gone anywhere. So, you know, so I guess I'm well greased." So,
So basically, it took you 15 years of experience and learning, and of course, healing already, or doing good work, but again, stumbling in between sometimes.
yeah.
Two steps at a time.
Every single person, from my point of view, is a gift for me to learn from. And so I, you know, as I've written each one of my books, I've included a lot of little stories that I have learned along the way, mostly from my people. We
So,
would not, we need one another.
oh, definitely, because without the other, how can I find my own mistakes? I
Right.
don't want to look at them if nobody shows them to me. Why would I? It feels so nice to be whatever my mistake may be. I mean,
That's right.
otherwise I wouldn't be doing it usually.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's so important.
let's continue that list of the biggest drawbacks and the biggest gifts.
Um, I think the drawback, some of the drawbacks are other people's misunderstanding of what consciousness is and does, their misunderstanding of what psychic ability is. Um, they think it's magic, you know, and part of it. So part of the gift on the gift side is that when you see big pictures, you spot patterns immediately, and you begin to see patterns everywhere. And you begin to say, that doesn't work out very well. That pattern always has a bad ending. And you share that with people. No, don't go there. That's not going to work. That isn't going to work out. Um, and and some people listen and some people don't. On the on the side of people misunderstanding what psychic ability is. Sometimes I think they think I should show up with robes and jewelry dangling, and I should not be a farmer wearing jeans and a t-shirt, you know, and things like that. And they think I'm going to do some kind of magical ceremony and, you know, okay, let's, or look at the crystal ball or whatever. True psychic ability is this beautiful combination of education, logic, and intuition. And I've had people say to me, well, you're cheating. You're using logic. And I'm like, duh. Why would you not use logic? Just using intuition is as crippling as just using logic. You use the two together. What do you observe? What's the pattern? And what do you know about that? And then what do you see in terms of that individual and their energy? So psychic ability is this on the fly kind of knowing, where you glance at something and you just know. And people do not pay attention to what they know. They aren't present to their own life. And so they miss a whole bunch of stuff. So, you know, I often say to people, well, did you see this? Did you notice that? Yeah, I did. Well, what did you make of that? Well, I didn't pay any attention. So I'm like, well, you missed the whole message. That's going to lead to this, which is going to lead to this, which is going to lead to such and such an outcome. And given the personality of the individual, there's going to be a problem. So that whole, you know, expectation, set of expectations that something weird is going to happen is a big, you know, it's something that you have to get beyond. Another expectation is that if I use the example, somebody's wearing shoes and socks, and 3 days later, somebody says to me, well, what color socks did he have on? Intuition, if you don't look at something, once you learn how to turn it off and on, then when you want to see something, you have to go turn it on, and you have to wait for the TV to warm up, so to speak, and then you see.
What he had 3 days ago.
Right. But if you don't go and look, it's not there. So somebody will say something like, well, what were her lights doing? And I didn't look. I just was looking at the body. I wasn't looking at the lights, because you have to do this little bit of a shift. And that little bit of a shift allows you to see all those lights. And the more you shift, the more you see in terms of their lights. And so that's another thing. If you're, it's, you know, intuition, if you want some peace of mind, you have to turn it off, or you have to turn off the all-knowing side, because stuff is going to come in if you don't. So then you have to take a minute to say, well, let me tune into that. So on the gift side, there's probably not much that you can't see. If you don't want to see it and you need to see it, it's going to come in the message of, or in the form of a message, auditory. If you don't want to see it or hear it and you need to know it, it's going to come as a feeling, like this knowing that you can't hardly put words to. So you can't not know. Consciousness is
can be a huge burden.
Yes and no. It's, let me say it this way. It was a tremendous burden at first. And I hold a lot of secrets today. And they're not really secrets to me, because nobody really has any privacy, because we're all telepathically communicating all the time. So the burden is, what do you say and what do you leave out? What did they give you permission, whether it was verbal permission or, you know, or some other signal? body language that says, yeah, it's okay for you to know this, etc. That kind of thing. Because in the beginning, I would say, well, you know, what about the fact that your husband is cheating on you? And you know, be like, oh, whoops. And then they would get all, who told you that? Well, you did. Well, I did not. My husband's not cheating. Yes, he is. And so it'd be like this discussion in which I had to learn to recognize, had we really had that verbal conversation, or was it something that I knew and I just needed to hold that knowledge and not do anything about it? And then that brings you to this point where you realize that you're not responsible for the entire world. You can't fix the entire world. So then the question becomes, well, what do I fix? Well, what do I help? Or what do I do? Well, there's your passion. You know, what you do is what you want to do. And if it's something that doesn't work out, you wanted the lesson. So if you want your neighbor's wife and that gets you into all kinds of trouble, or you decide, I just don't feel good about what I did, what you've got now is your own ethic. It's not coming from outside. It's something that you have decided for yourself. And that is powerful. So lots and lots of lessons.
Don't they understand that eventually it's our destiny, or basically we all have our own ethics system within us. Only we've been taught that we need those laws and whatever the government tells us to do, what is right, what is wrong, what church tells us to do, what is right, what is wrong. If only we would let our children grow up in a loving but also somewhat restricted environment. I mean, you can't let them run all over the place.
Right.
Then they would have their own ethics. Or it's within us. Everybody has it. Only we have been done. We've put it down and now say it's okay because there's no law that forbids it.
Yeah. Well, the laws really, if they're external, those aren't just imaginary. If they're internal, that's real to you. Yeah. And children, if you just ask children now and then, you know, after they do something that maybe is not good, do you feel good about that? And let them ponder, you know, that maybe they need to feel good about what they're doing. Maybe they need something to, you know, to be able to differentiate between good, bad, or what's helpful or not, or what's of service and what's greedy, etc.
Well, psychology have found out that left to themselves, children have a very keen awareness of what is fair.
That's right.
Between parties fighting.
That's right. They do. And they use it. They apply it. Yeah. So,
and it gets destroyed by wrong handling of these children, is my opinion. If you would leave them to grow up within their spirit, we wouldn't need any laws, whatever, from the government.
I know.
Just messing them up and then educating them into a box. But I wanted to just ask again, if you take a look at what happened, you get these gifts of having premonitions or intuitive, you can listen into any conversation you want, you can see the thoughts of other people, but if you want to make to use them sensibly, there's a lot of training you have to go through.
Yeah.
Not that you get this gift and it's already unwrapped, but no, you have to unwrap it until finally you get to the core of, there's a lot of work, it seems to me.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's work that almost consumes you. I have ended up making research into consciousness and science part of my life. So, because what I've learned is that there's no contradictions. You can't have contradictions And so that was a big thing. And my science was such an important piece in figuring out how to return to sanity, um, that I just became, it just became habitual to write and to keep track of the experiences that were happening, then to go back and study them, and then to draw conclusions from them. And I spent years studying the language of energy, which is dreams. And I mean, if you tell me your dreams, you're telling me what's going on in their core life. What's, exactly what's happening. And even now, I can walk into a house and just look at the house. It's a feng shui expression of exactly who that personality is, whether there's been any, logical or any real effort to present it in a feng shui way. It presents your energy, and it's everything about you presents your energy. And so I read those energies, and it's obvious. And I have had people say, how do you do that? And I'm like, I can't not do it. It's just the way that we are meant to be, I think. And so I'm hoping, as time goes on, that the consciousness of the planet will awaken a little bit, and it is waking now at a pretty good clip. And I know there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of garbage out there, but I don't mind the garbage because it gets people started. It gets them asking questions. So the truth is there if you dig around.
I have one last question, and that's I know so many, not so many, but I knew 3 or 4 people who have just awakened to their own Kundalini.
Oh.
And the most dramatic for me is a doctor with his wife wasn't really working because he was earning enough money with 3 children when this spontaneous Kundalini happened to him, and he felt bliss. And he felt like giving up his office as a doctor. And of course, his whole family did everything they could to drag him into a psychological clinic, to get him back into his doctor's job, which he was unable to fulfill anymore after his awakening. And so they dragged him off into the clinic, and they managed to dumb him down with medications. And he came out, and the whole game started over again, of course.
Of course.
It lasted, and then his wife tried to smuggle the medication into his food, so he wouldn't wake. Yeah, I mean, what do you tell those people? For the wife and the children, if she doesn't have a good job, the whole world breaks down because they're only bread givers, and now suddenly going crazy and not willing to work anymore in his trained occupation. I mean, that's something I've now realized 3 times. This one was the harshest that I saw. But that's what happens because psychology or modern medicine has no clue what Kundalini is. It's just a psychic disorder that they decide it is.
I know. So to answer your question, what do you say to people? I do several things because I have run into that, and a number of people have been released from psychiatric hospitals based on my book. So I give people a copy of my book, The Evolving Human, and then I maybe give them a copy of Consciousness and Energy, Volume 1. And in the meantime, I'm talking to their family, not the individual with the problem, but the people who are, the person with the Kundalini has the problem of being tested. That's the test. If you can't handle Kundalini, it's going to destroy you. And you will end up in a hospital somewhere or in a jail cell because you're behaving inappropriately based on what you know. You have to honor or find ways to honor what you know. So then I talk to the family and the often husband or wife or parents, sometimes it's parents, and I'll say, just point blank, where did you get the idea that you can entrap somebody into supporting you? Where's your sense of responsibility for supporting yourself? When what if he dies? Then what? Or to parents, it looks to me and sounds to me like 99% of your frustration and your insistence that this child be put in an institution is because you want him hidden so that he doesn't embarrass you and make you look like bad parents. And then, there's a host of other questions, whatever the situation is, you have to put that on the table. Because
don't they kick you out immediately? Do they
no,
listen to you?
they usually start crying.
Okay.
And you can see what the problem is. Some woman doesn't have permission to take care of herself and to take responsibility for her own life. And she's angry that so many opportunities or educational doors were closed to her. And now she's quote unquote stuck with these 3 kids and doesn't know anything about raising consciousness to its full potential. And it goes on, and you can usually see what's built right into the situation. There's only been one set of parents that I know of that has said, this is our child, we're not going to hide him, we're going to try to find ways to help him, to work with him, etc. So
only one of them was willing to accept the Kundalini awakening. Everybody else decided no, they wanted it their way.
Most people decide that they're going to fight or they're going to struggle. They always lose. The whole family loses in a Kundalini situation, because what you've got is an individual who's literally moved to the next dimension of understanding, a higher, more expansive consciousness, trying to work it out with people who are in the dark ages in terms of consciousness. So everybody cries. So I tell people, let's get the Kleenex and let's sit down and talk. And I try to prepare them. There's some hard things that I need you to understand. This is how it looks. Is that what you're trying to do? What would you want if that was you? Do you know anything about Kundalini? Do you understand spirituality? Do you know anything about consciousness? Do you have any of the science behind plasma? Nope, 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 nope. And so it's an educational process right from the get-go. So.
Yeah, that's I think one of the biggest hurdles at the very beginning.
Yeah,
it's a tragedy. And if you put these Kundalini awakeners under medication, I suppose, do they burn their nerves to death after a while?
It doesn't shut down the Kundalini.
That's what I mean. But you trying to suppress it, you build pressure until.
No, you can't stop it. It's too late. Kundalini can't be undone.
Okay.
So the only thing you can do with the drug is prevent the integration of all of that knowledge about the true nature of humanity and consciousness.
And so they might have the bothersome side effects, like having spontaneous
orgasms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how do I deal with that if my mind is my brain is dumbed down and my body does what it wants? Because
if it's a man, I tell them keep an extra pair of pants with you at all times. You might have to go change your pants. If it's a woman, I tell them there's nothing that you can really do. You have to. It's an intelligence that is built in. When you germinate a seed, a kind of intelligence with, plasma is an amazing, amazing substance. It creates, you put 2 frequencies together, they create a third and a fourth. and even a fifth. And some of those thirds and fourths and fifths create other frequencies. And so if it's a seed, it just keeps on folding and growing into a plant. And we say, oh, wow, look at that. It's really changed form. It's astounding. And so that same thing happens. Kundalini can't be undone. It can be stopped. You can stop the development and the understanding and the use of it, but as soon as you take away the medication, it's going to start up again, and it's going to try and teach you. It's going to try and get you to become a fully evolved being. And because we have so many undeveloped people here who really don't understand the nature of consciousness or energy even, they don't know anything about energy, then they end up trying to drag the person back into the realm that they used to fit in quite well. So it's a problem. It's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. And you know, I have to say, when I look back over the 40 years of this, because it happened when I was 31. So I am so grateful now that I stuck with it, that I didn't freak out, that I got in the habit of studying what I was writing and began to put two and two together. I think it's, you know, I hope it's helpful to other people. So
that's why I'm interviewing you, because I think it's at the moment, to me, there are more and more people having these spontaneous Kundalini awakenings, at least what I know of. And
right,
it's extremely important for them to find a way to maneuver through it. And of course, it's a hope, but it's also a challenge to know that the full gift you won't have developed until 15 years later.
Well, I think if I hadn't fought it, it probably would have been more like somewhere between 5 and 10 years. And the more and more we teach this within the culture, I think the more quickly we can arrive at the end state, which is an evolved being with an awakened consciousness. So, and I want to say this, which you triggered in me a minute ago. Maybe not everybody is going to have Kundalini, but a lot of people are having altered states and out of body kinds of things, and precognitive moments and telepathic moments, and those are all part of that awakening process. And maybe the full blast of the energy, which is enough to kill you, didn't happen for them, but they're having little pieces of it. They still have to figure out what do we do with that.
Let's talk about that in part 2.
Okay, all right.
Relying on guidance, what the ropes taught you, and how people can use these aspects of Kundalini, which is not a full Kundalini awakening, but which happens more and more to everybody.
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Thank you so much, Penny.
And you're so welcome. It's been a delight to talk with you. Oh my gosh, good question. Good questions.
Thank you. Well, everybody coming back in for part 2, which we will continue this conversation with some more interesting topics to help you. Thank you.
Very well.